Okay, so Arthurian romances started pretty much in the 12th century and are generally credited to France. These romances chronicle King Arthur, his Knights of the Round Table, and their many, many adventures, many of them of a romantic nature. There were a lot. Knights were not very faithful people. So Chrétien de Troyes is the first author who kind of gets this whole genre started, and it basically takes off from there. So many of these are told in cycles. They include stories about Merlin, how Arthur became king, the scandalous love affair of Lancelot and Guinevere, and the ever-popular quest for the Holy Grail. However, the big one that's written that most people go by is Morte D'Arthur, which is by Sir Thomas Malory. Just as a side note, we aren't actually sure if Arthur actually existed. Some people think he was a Roman general. Some people think that he's loosely based off a king that was mentioned in some medieval writings. And there's some people who just think he was completely made up. Unfortunately, I don't think we will ever actually know the truth. So the Arthurian legends actually start with his father, Uther Pendragon, King of England. So he invites the Duke of Cornwall and his wife over to his castle. And his wife's name is Igraine, and she is very attractive. So Uther comes on to her, and she is super offended. She tells her husband that they must have been sent for so that she can be dishonored. Obviously, her husband's not going to be cool with that, and they leave. So Uther's mad and said if they won't come back, he's going to go and wage war upon them. And the Duke of Cornwall is basically like, bring it. So Igraine is at the castle of Tintagel, and her husband is at Terrabil. So Uther sends his men to Terrabil to carry out their attack. But Uther is such a little lovesick puppy that he asks Merlin, the renowned wizard, to come help him get Igraine. Merlin says, yeah, no problem, and makes Uther swear to reward him and fulfill his desires. Then, the super weirdness happens. So while the Duke of Cornwall is under siege, Uther, who Merlin has disguised to look like the Duke, goes to Tintagel and has relations with Igraine. Meanwhile, the Duke is killed. So Uther takes off in the morning, and I'm pretty sure Morgan Le Fay, who is Igraine's youngest daughter and a very powerful witch herself, sees him leave and sees through Merlin's magic and knows that that's not her dad. So keep that in mind. Then a knight comes running in and tells Igraine that her husband was killed. As it was turned out, Igraine is pregnant. So kind of freaking her out because her husband was killed at the same time she thought that she had conceived this child with him. And so, ghost baby. Finally, Merlin shows up and he's like, here's the truth. So Igraine gives birth to Arthur, who Merlin then takes and spirits away and gives to the care of Sir Ector. So Uther marries Igraine. Igraine's daughters are married off to powerful men, except for Morgan Le Fay, who at first is sent to a nunnery where she becomes very powerful in the art of necromancy. And then she's married off. Arthur's growing up away from court, and eventually Uther gets sick and he's dying. So as he's dying, his kingdom is in battle, and Merlin says, hey, you got to go out on the field or you're never going to win. So they haul him out on a litter, and Uther secures a victory even though he is literally dying. They get him back to London, and he's basically in his deathbed where he tells Merlin, yeah, I want Arthur to take the crown. Now we get to the part where pretty much everybody knows. Merlin devises the test of the sword and the stone. Obviously it's enchanted and won't budge for anyone but Arthur. But that doesn't stop anyone from going to Canterbury on Christmas to actually try and pull the sword from the stone. So when everyone fails, they decide to hold a huge tournament because, how else are you going to decide who's going to be king? Sir Ector lives nearby, and he's like, hey, we'll take Sir Kay, my son, and Sir Arthur, my adopted son, to the tournament to compete. So real quick, the way it works back then is if your father was a knight, basically you then became his squire and you learned all the knightly things. Then if you had a younger brother, he would become your squire when you became a knight and again, carry on the tradition. So Arthur is supposed to have Kay's stuff because that's what a squire does, but he realizes he forgot the sword. So he runs back to get it, but there's no one there to let him in. Arthur then sees the sword in the churchyard and he pulls it out and takes it to Kay. Kay looks at it, sees what it is, and he's like, oh, guess I'm king now. Of course, that's not going to fly. And they're like, okay, you pulled it out once, so pull it out again. Of course, this isn't going to work for anyone but Arthur. Everyone's not too happy about this, so he's actually put under protective watch by Sir Kay, Sir Ulfius, Sir Brastias, and Sir Balwyn, until he is finally actually coronated the King of England. Then enters the Lady of the Lake. So Merlin takes Arthur to meet Nimue, who is the Lady of the Lake. She gives him the sword Excalibur and a scabbard that makes it so that he cannot be injured in battle. Yeah, common misconception, the sword in the stone was not actually Excalibur. However, remember that half-sister Morgan Le Fay? Well, she hates Arthur. Basically, like, he's the reason her dad's dead. So she tries to steal Excalibur and give it to her lover, but Arthur finds out, stops that one. And she is, however, able to steal the magical scabbard and replace it with a replica without anyone actually knowing. In the course of all this, she seduces Arthur somewhere and bears him a child who is born on May Day, whose name is Mordred. So Merlin warns Arthur that this child is going to bring about his death. So round up all the kids who were born on May Day, put them on a ship that weirdly sinks on its own, except, of course, for Mordred, Arthur's son. He actually survives, washes up on shore, and gets taken in, and eventually makes his way to court. Meanwhile, Arthur makes the round table for his knights so that every knight is equal, which, given the feudal system that they grew up in, it would be a novel concept and one of the really cool ideas that have come from the Arthurian legends. Eventually, Arthur marries Guinevere, who ends up having an affair with his best friend Lancelot, and all the knights have adventures, and one of the most famous is, of course, the quest for the Holy Grail. So everything's going pretty well until Mordred shows up, and he's like, hey, Dad. Also, by the way, your wife is sleeping with your bestie. So this all kind of goes back to Morgan Le Fay. She had an unrequited love for Lancelot and absolutely hated Guinevere. So this would punish them both, as well as split up the round table, because some knights are siding with Arthur and some knights are siding with Lancelot. So kind of helps her with her whole, destruction of Camelot. So Arthur has to do something. He banishes Lancelot and he sentences Guinevere to death. However, she is rescued by Lancelot, and Arthur is persuaded to go to battle against them to basically save his ego. Eventually, the Pope told Arthur that he would kick him out of the church if he didn't take Guinevere back, and she was like, yeah, I'll go back to him, save my honor. She goes back. But the war doesn't end, because Gawain is so mad at Lancelot because in one of those battles, Lancelot killed Garrett, and Gawain will not rest until one of them is dead. So eventually, Arthur goes on a military campaign and leaves Mordred, his nephew's son, in charge of the kingdom. Obviously, this is going to end badly, and Mordred pretty much tries to take over. He actually tries to make Guinevere marry him by telling her Arthur is dead, but she's not stupid, and she sends Arthur word that she has to return, now. But they are held up because the Romans are invading Gaul, and they promise to stay to fight and help, fend them off. In the melee, Gawain dies. He later appears to Arthur in a dream and tells him that he must wait for Lancelot before he takes on Mordred. Of course, Arthur's not going to do that because, pride. So when Arthur returns, they fight. Mordred is killed, but Arthur is fatally wounded. So remember that whole, stealing the magic scabbard thing from before? Yeah, it all kind of leads to his end. So he's dying. He has Sir Gerfelt with him, and Arthur tells Gerfelt that he has to go and throw Excalibur back into the lake because Nimue gave it to him. He needs to actually give it back. So 3 times he's like, yeah, I did it. And Arthur's like, no, you didn't. Go actually throw this in the lake. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, no, go throw it in the lake. And so he finally knows that Gerfelt did it, because he sees Nimue reach out and grab the sword, brandish it 3 times, and then pull it back underwater. So at this point, Arthur knows this is the end, and he sends Gerfelt away. When he rides away, he looks back and he sees Arthur on the shore, and there's a black ship that is full of women that is coming towards him. And it's actually Morgan Le Fay, who helps Arthur onto the ship, and they sail away to Avalon, which is supposed to be a sort of Eden for deceased heroes. Or it's a place out of time where Arthur recovered, and he is waiting to return to England to save it from its enemies.